Hello, Tony. We want to start with semiconductors. The White House warning chip makers to diversify their supply chains as the Russia-Ukraine conflict potentially escalates. If Russia retaliates against U.S. And other coordinated action, companies could be blocked from access to key materials like neon and palladium. Meanwhile, the Semiconductor Industry Association forecasts 8.8% sales growth in 2022. That follows a record 2021 with more than $500 billion in sales. Today, Wedbush upgrades Micron to outperform. Raymond James takes Texas Instruments down to market perform. Lo, to what degree do you expect to have to react within the industry to how this Russia-Ukraine situation intensifies? I mean, semiconductors have overall been pretty stable performers for the market overall, and then there's just the sentiment involved.
Right. I think it's interesting just to take a look at, how the market is reacting to the conflict in general, or the potential for conflict in general in that region. And look, the government is issuing some warnings to the chip manufacturers that they should start considering identifying other sources for some of those raw materials that were mentioned on your end, neon for the gases and palladium for some of the materials that go into the chip production. So, I think obviously the executives have been thinking about this. They have very smart people on the supply chain. But I think it just shows how globalization has really impacted every aspect. And, when we start to look at these global conflicts, it's another aspect of the macroeconomic economy that can have a significant impact. The demand for chips is just insatiable right now. If we think about, all the different elements that chips are used in, everything has a chip these days. There's a lot of attention placed on cars. That's where we see a lot of growth. But then there's the IoT, there's infrastructure, et cetera. And all of this is dependent on the ability to be able to have access to building those chips.
And given that, then, because the argument has been, hey, chips are going to be in everything, chips are so important, how much do we need to be concerned about the impact of geopolitics and even military conflict as we expect, perhaps, if you follow that thesis, chips to have such an outsized impact on economies in general?
Yeah, I think we should look at, some of the conflicts that have happened in the past. We didn't really see a significant amount of disruption, but what we did see was a significant increase in the prices. And so that's another factor, right? I think those two elements, even if conflict is going to be, and based on some of the comments from the coming out of Russia, it seems that they're still open to diplomacy. So I think that's good. But one never knows. We could see a significant increase in the price if those materials are still available and able to get out, or the folks on the supply chain need to really start thinking about other places to be able to source some of those materials. And then there will be cost in that, because I would suspect that they're not going to be in the same abundance from other suppliers, meaning that there's going to lead to an increase in prices for those components.
Very interesting. Now, Lo, as you look at the fact that Raymond James downgraded Texas Instruments, then Wedbush upgraded Micron, how much divergence do you think you're going to see within this sector in terms of how these companies can manage these new pressures?
Yeah, I think that's the key, is how good are they at managing these pressures? How good are they at actually managing their supply chains? Looking at some of the other chip manufacturers, I think looking at some of the capital equipment makers is also going to be interesting. And, thinking about what impact this is going to have, because we already saw pressure within the supply chain due to COVID and the insatiable demand for chips. And I think this is going to be a true test of the company's ability to be able to manage these supply chain issues. And it could potentially portend their ability in the future, knowing that we're going to continue to see more demand for chips. Are these companies going to be able to produce that supply, and then to be able to navigate that demand if there is, all of a sudden a decrease in the demand? Will they build up too much inventory? So I think this is going to be a true test of the ability for the supply chain aspect of these companies. And that's, I think, what analysts are going to really key in on.